Oxford Clinical Trials Unit and also Professor of Rehabilitation at Oxford University. She has a long-standing interest in clinical trials and medical statistics, and from her own clinical perspective, rehabilitation and of musculoskeletal and chronic conditions. She works with clinicians from a variety of backgrounds to develop pragmatic trials to capture the effectiveness and the cost-effectiveness of different treatments. She is the chief investigator for a number of trials in rehabilitation interventions, and today she will share her practical experience, hands-on experience of running pragmatic clinical trials.
Thank you. Bonjour et ça va? Ça va? Ça va bien? Thank you very much for asking me to come and speak, and happy anniversary. I've been given quite a large remit to talk about my own trials experience, talk about trials from an investigator's viewpoint, designing and running trials to deliver patient benefit, why should various stakeholders get involved, and how can patients make a difference and get involved. And I'm going to have to push on to get through all of that. So, very briefly, my conflicts. I have no conflicts of interest of relevance to today's discussion. And a little bit now about myself. So I'm a kind of an emerging new type of health service researcher called a clinical trialist. And what this basically means is that I am what we call in the UK a jack of all trades and master of none. So I actually have quite a broad scope of knowledge. I know some things about health economics I know quite a bit about. Statistics, I'm trained as an applied statistician. I know about the health service. I came originally from a health service background where I was a physical therapist. And I'm also kind of quite bossy, and I know about managing people and projects. So I'm kind of a hybrid type of individual. And there's plenty of us types around. They come from lots of different fields. They can be clinicians, but I think you need to have this broad skill set to be able to do this job really well. My own personal perspective in doing clinical trials is that I have a taxpayer's perspective. Having worked in the health service, I've seen how much money is wasted. And really, I would like to see in my lifetime an improvement in the value of healthcare that's delivered, certainly in the NHS and hopefully much further beyond. So I am a chief investigator for some studies, and I'm a supporting investigator for others. I've been involved in my own trials as a chief investigator. I've randomized about 25,000 patients to date, and involved with others, many more than that. I'm the foundation director of 2 UK clinical trials units, and I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about what these are now so that you can understand. These are academic, usually based units, so they're usually based in a university, not always. Sometimes they're based in a hospital. But what they do is they run quite large volumes of publicly funded trials. So that funding usually comes from government, but it can come from the charitable sector. We do some industry work under certain conditions. So I have a mixed portfolio of work. And what we are not, we are kind of an office of people with expertise. We are not a clinic that brings patients in, although we work with clinics that bring patients in to actually do procedures on them. So that's what a clinical trial unit is from our perspective. I've been involved in doing early phase through to pragmatic phase 3 studies, and that's what all of the units that I've been involved in have done. And I've also been involved with the NIHR over a number of years in commissioning and monitoring trials, and I've done that with a number of other funders in the UK as well. So that's me. Okay, so this is my trophy cupboard, and probably the people on the front row, I had listened interestingly as Frank talked and said it does, kind of having a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that's not, just what we want. And kind of like, And I know Tom cringes when all of us clinical trialists produce our little trophy cabinet, but this matters actually to us. It's not the only thing, but what it shows to us is that we're achieving work at the highest level of scientific endeavour, and that we're doing things that are of clinical importance. You don't get into these journals without having achieved that. But what's more important is what has gone on after some of these trials. And I'm very fortunate to work in a funding environment in the UK that has enabled me to get involved also, not only give me the opportunity to do these great trials, but then to work in implementation. And what I'll just point out is the odd one or two. So back skills training trial, we looked to see whether cognitive behavioural therapy was an effective treatment for low back pain. It's a high volume condition, reasonably low cost, but because of volume, it actually costs a lot of money to a health system. And what we showed was that cognitive behavioural therapy actually could be delivered really cheaply, and it had a very sustained effect. And we've gone on now. The results have been replicated in a US study, which is really reassuring, and we've gone on now to implement this through the NHS, and currently we've trained over 500 therapists to deliver this intervention, and it's being taken up at the moment in various refugee camps in Jordan, where they also have really high burden of disease with this. So there is a story of ongoing implementation, and there's a story with most of these, but not all of them, and that comes from being within a health system of health funding research, not just around clinical trials. So what is a clinical trial? It's a large experiment, that goes without saying. We look at the benefits from patient perspective, so we use patient-reported outcomes. We're looking for costs, harms, and hence an assessment of overall value of a health technology. It's really challenging because it requires multidisciplinary working and coordination. You've got to be able to negotiate across multiple interfaces, and this is why this kind of jack-of-all-trades skill set really helps, and having some understanding of the different environments that you're working in. You've really got to roll your sleeves up, and I do an awful lot of jobs that perhaps my academic colleagues might sneer at. I'm very happy to sort things out and to sort paperwork out and to sort situations out. And, again, that's, I think, part of being in the clinical trials community. We tend to be doers. It requires high standards. These are expensive projects, about 1.5 to 2 million pounds, depending on the size of the project. And it was music to my ears when a gentleman over here said, gosh, that's really good value for money. I hope you were listening, Professor Wally. And so, it's very rewarding, but it's also quite daunting as an investigator. And it kind of, sometimes when I get a new trial funded and it comes through and I get the award letter, I'm not thinking, yippee, I'm thinking, oh my God, have they really funded that? Now we've got to deliver it. So it can be really quite daunting. So how do we go about that? I'm going to talk deviation. I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding pragmatism. So variability is the key to understanding pragmatic trials. And pragmatic means everyday setting, but what we really want is everyday variability. And in the types of trials that we're traditionally used to doing, phase 1 and phase 2 type trials, particularly in the regulatory environment, we're used to what I call designing out variability, so really trying to minimize it so that we can see the signal. And in fact, the signal from the intervention is as large as possible. When we come to do a phase 3 or pragmatic study, what we're trying to do is to incorporate variability and to estimate the effects of some of that variability on the intervention in everyday settings. So we need to ensure that we anticipate and capture either all or the important causes of variability. We should expect larger sample sizes, and in the everyday setting, we should certainly expect to see smaller but worthwhile treatment differences than we would in a phase 2 study. So where does the variability come from? And it's about listening for noise. It comes from centres or units of health service provision. So when we start looking at lots of different centres, they're all constructed a little bit differently. They have different types of individuals working in them. Some are very positive, and then you go to another centre and it's really quite negative. And this can impact, of course, on the effectiveness of an intervention. There's clinician learning effects, methods of training, compliance of patients. There's natural variation in the condition and response, and we always try to take the broadest possible sample that we can here, the one that would incorporate all of the patients who might have indication for the treatment that we're testing. What we try to do still is to minimize experimental variability, because actually that's a variability that we don't really want to see too much of. So we look carefully when we design the experiment to make sure that we can keep that level of noise down as far as we possibly can. But there is a trade-off here, because these are large experiments and they need to be very simple. And sometimes simple methods of measurement are a little bit more noisy than very precise methods of measurement. So this is, our job as clinical trialists to weigh all of these things up. This is the Precis Wheel, and I'll suggest that you have a look at this because it really helps to conceptualize pragmatism well. So I'm going to give you an example from my catalogue. This is a study that we've just finished recruitment of, and we will report in the next couple of years. It's an NIHR-funded study, and it's on preventing fall injury in older people. Now, I think a lot of people know about falls in older people, and millions of pounds are spent on fall prevention in the UK and indeed across Europe. There's huge clinical enthusiasm for this. But actually, when you start to scratch the surface, the evidence base is not as strong as you would think. And actually, it's nowhere near as strong as you would think for the most expensive treatments that are used. And these are the multifactorial fall prevention clinics, which use medical expertise in particular to assess fall risk and then to treat people. There's no existing evidence really on costs, on quality of life, and on the important outcomes like fracture outcomes and institutionalization. So actually, the evidence base isn't that robust. So, ever the skeptic, I applied to have a piece of work in this area funded. And what we did to begin with was we did a systematic review, and this was published in the BMJ, it's now a little while ago, 2008, which really kind of called into question the effectiveness of the multifactorial fall prevention clinics. But more importantly, what it did was it made sure that we ticked this important box of reducing research waste, making sure the question has not already been answered. So that was the first step. Second step was to design and frame the question properly. And of course, this is a 10,000 patient trial. It's a large trial because we wanted to have a look at fracture as the primary outcome. And we wanted to look at costs and benefits, all of those type of things that starts to require quite large numbers of patients. And we had to think about what type of design do we use? And this is where the expertise of a clinical trials unit really comes to bear, because the choices here are difficult. You have to weigh different design features with the logistics of running the trial and of the costs. And every time we design a trial, we go through this sequence. It's not a menu, it's kind of a process of really thinking about what it is we're trying to ask and why, and then how we do that. So we designed a cluster randomized trial where we've got 64 general practices. They're randomized to one of 3 treatments, and the cluster size is controlled so that we can actually control the overall size of the experiment. And we control the cluster size by taking a random sample of all the people over the age of 70 from these practices and then reducing the cluster size down and getting the appropriate balance between the number of centres and the cluster size. Then you kind of hit a sweet spot where you can actually have a really nice, efficient project. We follow up outcomes over 18 months, and we use a mixture of routine data and patient-reported outcomes. And I'm just going to show you the type of process that we have gone through to achieve this project. So the first thing is to find recruitment sites, and you've heard a little bit about the research networks. They exist across the UK. I think this might actually be an old map of the research networks, but regardless, it doesn't matter. Basically, what we did is we went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these research networks. How did we choose them as investigators? Well, we do it in a kind of a much more kind of real-life type of approach. I have a network of people I know. My colleagues have a network of people we know. We know which networks recruit well. We know which networks are interested in studies of older people. So what we do is that we kind of like line that all up. But the network definitely gives us access to meeting those people in the first place and to have a selection of people that we can line up, because we have to line up not only the recruitment of patients, but the delivery of services for the trial as well, because these are new services that are being slotted in. 3-arm trial, advice, some practices are doing advice, some are doing multifactorial fall prevention, and some are just doing exercise alone. So this network is important for us to be able to identify those resources. In order to identify our random sample, we have to use quite a sophisticated mechanism of software development. And within the clinical trials unit, we have software engineers who can help us with this. So they develop software for us that selects the random sample from a range of different practice databases, because UK doesn't have a standard system. And this also then kind of provides the infrastructure to our study. It defines our sample, ensures that it's regulatorily compliant in terms of data protection, back-end audit, all of those types of things, all built into the programming. And believe you me, I could not do that myself. We have to prepare packs for each general practice, so we double up the amount of people we ask, because we only expect 50% to respond. And this is just the packs for one practice. So this one practice, one phase. There's 4 follow-up phases. So you begin to see the volume of paperwork in this instance that we use. Now, we chose paper here. We can do ECRF, but we've got people up to the age of 102 in this study. They are not computer users. In fact, we have to print the questionnaires in large print. And we also have to think about what happens when they perhaps don't get their responses in the box. We use a scanning system to scan this volume of data in. There's 50,000 records to deal with, so they're scanned, but they are all checked, because some older people don't write in the box. Well, in fact, I wouldn't probably write in the box either. Age has nothing to do with it. And they also have queries, and they have to ring somebody, and then there's just the odd one or two who's quite lonely, and they'd also like to ring somebody, because, you know, kind of, it's a very different perspective for a patient to be in a trial, and for them to be able to ring somebody seems a perfectly legitimate thing for them to be able to do, and to have a chat is important. And this is Suzanne Finnegan, who's one of our physios, who mans one of the pre-fit desks. And these desks were manned for the kind of 2.5-year time period that people were being recruited into the study. This is just one block of paperwork. You can see the storage issues that begin to accumulate as well. Sorry, I've just done that wrong. There we go. There's the recruitment graph. It's very tightly project managed, so we meet every month. You have to intervene early if you want to make sure that you have successful recruitment. This wasn't absolutely perfect. I'm going to blame the funder for the flat line in the middle. Well, she did it about whether we could do this. But that's cruel of me, Tom, I'm sorry. We keep a really close review of this recruitment. And so what's this done for us? 7 years, 42 close collaborations. And if we look to the extended network of people, that's about 100 people who've been involved in helping us to achieve this. It's been actually a really enjoyable thing. I know it probably looks really quite daunting, and I've had the fortune that the trial team that I brought to this study was a team that had been working together for at least 10 years, so you build some experience in, and they were able to manage this project. They weren't fazed by the size, and it has come with experience, but I'm very proud of the achievements of the team. And just have a little look who's in the team. There's obviously the chief investigator. These are really active contributors. Healthcare professionals, statisticians, economists, Ethicist, really important for us. More so in some studies than others. This is kind of important because we could have approached people with cognitive impairment. Patient and public involvement representatives, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Quality assurance, programming, and the comprehensive research networks. There's been a lot of goodwill from a lot of different people, both employed on our project and not employed on our project. So, how can patients and the public get involved? This is another thing that we've built experience in. The funder, the NIHR, began to talk about patient and public involvement about 10 years ago, I think, maybe a little bit longer. And as investigators, to begin with, we were all a little bit, maybe they'll start being quiet after a while, they won't go on about this, and it'll drift off the agenda. But it didn't, and actually the funder was quite right to really insist on this because it was difficult at first. What we do is we co-opt, or we have patient and public involvement co-applicants on our application form, so they're involved right from the beginning in developing the application. They are equal team members. And of course we had difficulty. They contribute through the whole process. We did have difficulty finding willing and suitable PPI representatives to begin with, and it was wrong, sometimes from both sides. We just hadn't quite got it right, but we've stuck at it, and it's really helped us because it's particularly helpful in making sure that the broader patient perspective is involved, so particularly around what type of outcomes to select, what type of interventions to select. There's no point in testing an intervention or developing an intervention, particularly in the field of complex interventions, where the patient then, or the patient body, is not going to want to attend because it's either too voluminous or too, whatever it is. We can't think as patients, so it's been really helpful. We have help in finding PPI people to get involved. It comes from a variety of the different parts of the infrastructure of the NIHR that you haven't seen as yet, but research design service, from some other of the more implementation-focused sides, and from the investment that's been made more broadly. And believe you me, citizens can surprise you with their abilities. I have learnt a whole heap of new stuff. We live in a very closed world in the research arena, and I've been really a great recipient of their input. So, hopefully my example shows you how important a clinical trials unit can be and is. If I was left to my own devices to run a study like Prefit, in fact, I don't think I'd probably have my hands on the keyboard by now. It would be a total disaster. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this because I suspect I'm probably on, I'm on final warning, 1 minute. To me, this is absolutely, I kind of think this is a no-brainer. Regardless of the health system, resources are finite. And we have to be able to maximise value and value for all. So to me, these trials are hugely important. Clinicians should want to get involved. Not all clinicians do. And I have to say that it disappoints me that my own professional body still is discussing whether or not a randomised controlled trial is an appropriate way to evaluate its service, and why can't we just go on and do what we think we should be able to do. But I'm not in such a regulated part of the health sector, and it is quite amazing what health professionals can do when they're not regulated. We have to disinvest, we have to move on, and we have to innovate. So I'm really a firm advocate. But I'm going to say that it's not always that easy. At the end of these journeys, sometimes we find things like, very early on in my career, I did a trial that basically showed that bog standard physiotherapy, the manual therapy, versus advice only provided by the NHS. I can't generalise any further out than that. was no different. And boy, did this cause a stir. First of all, my professional body blacklisted me. I wasn't spoken to for 5 years at any meeting that I ever went to. And indeed, this all appeared in the national press. So you can kind of, I kind of slightly understood that they would be quite angry, but I hadn't really realised the depth of their anger. And indeed, when I did eventually find a positive treatment for low back pain, then on Radio 2, which is one of our BBC radio programmes, there was a patient who very kindly said, if that Professor Lamb came on the radio and told me this is all in my head, I'll tell her something as well. So sometimes you can't win, but at least I do feel that the work that we've done as a team has been worthwhile and beneficial, and I'm hugely grateful for the opportunities that I've had through the NIHR. So thank you.